Hello, and welcome to what we're calling Editing 101. This is our first attempt to try to put together some material for scholars who are outside of the English-speaking world to learn about publishing in English-speaking educational research journals. My name is Jerry Latondra, and I am the current editor of the American Journal of Education. And with me I have Hansol Woo from Korea, who's going to be helping us talk and ask some questions. So I'll let Hansol introduce himself.
Let me introduce by myself. My name is Hansol Woo. I'm a PhD student in Educational Leadership Program of Penn State University. Before starting my PhD course, I worked as research associate at the Korean Educational Development Institute.
So Hansol, you've had experience publishing in Korean educational research journals. What differences or similarities maybe, let's focus on the differences. What differences do you see with publishing in English language journals?
The major procedure of publishing is very similar, but there is a big difference, I think. It takes much less time to review. The review of manuscript is completed within a couple of months. For this reason, some researchers prefer domestic journals in Korea. They could be provided feedback in very short time.
That's very good information to know, because I think a lot of scholars are already hesitant to take the time to learn how to get the article ready in English, and then you have that long review process. Now, I've put together some main points here in this PowerPoint that folks can see on their screen about what are the major parts of a research article. Did you notice any differences between the structure, the basic working parts of an article in English, and how you would write it in Korean?
The structure of Korean research article is same as to English language journals, so I am able to follow a logical flow without difficulty.
Well, that's good, because these parts really are very critical. And so I thought maybe we just go through some of the parts and people can follow along on their screen and go over them. And what I've pulled out here are things like title, abstract, the introduction, the lit review, the data and methods, the results, the discussion, and the addenda. Now, of course, some of these, some articles won't have all of these parts, so they might have a slightly different part, but I wanted to focus on these as the major. So let's maybe talk about a couple of just the main ones, and of course we should probably start with the title. Now, here we already have a kind of difference of opinion. So some people think the title should say just what the article is about, and other people like to have a kind of catchy title. So how does that compare with Korea?
Personally, I think such as mnemonic catch title can use by distinguished professor or senior professor, not for younger researcher. What do you think about that?
Well, that's very interesting. I think it has, in the U.S., less to do with the status of the professor than the field. So some fields really want very descriptive, dry, boring titles.
Yes.
The effect of a reading program on 6th grades in a public elementary school in Huntsville, Alabama. Boom. But in other fields and in other journals like mine, I think we're open to more creative titles, and we feel that it can help the researchers remember the content better. Now, again, with the title page, another thing that's important to remember is that all the authors have to be included. And of course, this brings up questions of who actually contributed to the article. Is that ever a problem did you find in Korea about whose name should go on an article?
Nowadays, we depend on the contribution. So it's not a big deal. Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's good. All right, well, let's go next to the abstract. Now, I think this might be the most important part of the paper. In my experience, I find a lot of scholars really write their abstract very quickly, very sloppily almost. They don't pay a lot of attention to it. So do you have any impressions about that?
Frankly speaking, I do just like that.
Well, good, then this will be a benefit. When, as an editor or as a reviewer for a journal, the abstract is critical. In fact, it's the thing that we pay the most attention to when an article comes in. Because we have many articles coming into the journal, and we have to quickly decide who should be looking at this. Is this really worthy to send out and bother a reviewer? So of course we try to look at the manuscript, but the abstract really is what catches the eye and really gives us an insight into whether or not this article, this research topic is important. So I really emphasize that people, should convey that big idea. Now, again, some people have different opinions. Some people say you shouldn't put your results in the abstract,
Yeah.
so that people have to read the paper. Have you heard that advice?
Yeah, in some researcher recommended
Mhm.
like that, but
Mhm.
others didn't agree with that.
Here we
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
So I think that shows the importance of knowing your journal.
Mhm.
For a journal like AJE, we want to know the big idea. We want that main finding right there in the abstract, so that our readers who are coming from a very broad background can easily identify what articles they want to see and they want to focus on. So yes, pay attention to the kinds of abstracts that your journal focuses on. Now the introduction. Here's the question, I don't know about you, but this was the question that I feared in graduate school. Why is this research important? Or as my dissertation advisors used to say, why do I care? They were very blunt about this. So in the introduction, I think you have to really be telling a story. And that's something I don't know if we emphasize enough in research. Have any of your other colleagues talked about the importance of telling a story in the research article?
I think it depends on the discipline of education part area. Some kinds of, for example, philosophy of education or history of education, they usually describe the backgrounds and story, but other fields such as administration or statistics don't like.
They don't like the story.
They don't like this story. Yeah.
Well, I think again, that's, you have to pick and understand your own journal, your own specialty.
Yeah.
For our journal, because we're a major journal for all different fields of education, even a very statistical article has to have a storyline. It's not going to catch the interest of a broad range of people. The other thing that I often see as an editor is that the introduction may tell what the question is, the research questions, the theoretical significance, but it doesn't give the reader what I call a roadmap to follow. It doesn't say, how is this article going to progress? And we've found over the years that just some brief writing, a brief kind of summary of how the ideas will be introduced really helps our readers in terms of following the flow of the article. Now, a lot of these other areas like the literature review, the data and methods, and of course the results are going to be common, and people should probably know how to do them. But what I've suggested here is that your lit review, the order of how you talk about the ideas, and your results, the order that you talk about what you found, follow the same pattern. Has anyone ever talked with you about that idea?
I didn't know that.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I hope this is a helpful insight.
Thank you.
Because oftentimes people review the literature and they start with the big idea,
Yeah.
and then they just talk about the literature and they talk about the theoretical literature, and they talk about the practical experimental effects. that can sometimes be very confusing for a reader. So if possible, I ask authors to think about the ideas they're reviewing, and then when they present their results, present results in the same pattern. So if we have a big idea that we talk about at first, then the first part of our results should probably be results that pertain to that big idea. It doesn't have to be strict, you know, 1A in each section, but I think it does help our readers a good bit.
Sometimes I feel difficulty to distinguish literature review from theoretical backgrounds. Is there any difference?
Well, here again, that's something I think that each field might have a little different take. In some areas, the lit review really should be just the empirically related studies. In others, they want you to cover the theoretical big ideas.
Yeah.
So whether you break out the theory into the introduction and keep just the empirical literature in the lit review is something your field may differ on. Again, for our journal, we often see a mixture of both in the lit review. All right, well, once you're through with telling people the results, you've got to wrap it up. And here is where I see two major issues that people often fail to do. And I've put here in American idiomatic English, tell them what you told them. So there's an old saying that we learn in high school, or I learned in high school many years ago, about a good speech. Tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. In other words, you give your reader an overview of what you're going to say, then you say it in detail, and then you summarize it. You go back over the main points again. I think this also holds true for many research articles. It has to be very short, very concise, but that end discussion should really wrap up for the reader what was the big idea, what were the main findings. And then, of course, we often expect that authors will elaborate on their findings and how this paper adds to scholarly knowledge. Now, you do have to acknowledge your limitations, but a major flaw we see is this long section of limitations, probably from writing dissertations.
Yeah.
In research articles, you need to acknowledge those limitations which are critical, that the reader needs to know about, but it doesn't pay to go on and on about the limitations of your study. And most reviewers will be critical of that.
Yeah.
All right, then of course there's the stuff that comes at the end. References have to be accurate, they have to be complete. Tables and figures in most journals go at the end, not in the actual manuscript. And of course you have to be careful about endnotes and other things like that. So that's a kind of overview of the basic parts of a working educational research article. Were there any other things that you found interesting or different from what your experience has been?
I would like to ask that there are so many different kinds of English journal. So how can I target the journal?
Well, that's an excellent question. And that's going to be the subject of our next video. We're going to go over the types of journals, association journals, private journals, general topic journals, specific focus journals, and talk with people about how those different kinds of educational research journals look for articles and what's considered a quality article. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate talking with you today.
Thank you.